Hey, good evening. I hope my voice is audible and I am visible. Just confirm me if my voice is audible and I am visible. Good evening. Perfect. So we'll give, I think, 30 seconds of time so that other people can join. Good evening, good evening, good evening. So today's topic is very interesting, which is on decentralized clinical trials. And I'll be taking interview based question and answers on decentralized clinical trials. So without any delay, let's jump into the topic, which is called as decentralized clinical trials. What are decentralized clinical trials and how these decentralized clinical trials are different from normal clinical trials, and what is the best use of decentralized clinical trials we can do it. So first, coming point to what is decentralized clinical trials. And during this session, I'll be putting some questions also for students so that students can put some questions about what are the different interview based questions can be asked in interview based questions also during this YouTube live session. So now coming back to the first point, what is decentralized clinical trial? So now decentralized clinical trials is also known as virtual clinical trials or remote clinical trials. So these are the studies which are conducted using the remote kind of methods. So virtual clinical trials or remote clinical trials by using a remote methods for a different processes, including the participants or patient recruitment, patients enrollments, and monitoring of subjects, and also data collection. So all these processes are being done virtually. So decentralized clinical trials is the one process wherein the patient participation or recruitment or patient enrollment or engagement, monitoring of the patient, and data collection of the patient can be done remotely. Then it is called as decentralized clinical trial process. So now a simple logic, why a patient has to come to hospital or a site? Why can't every patient home can become a hospital or site? Why can't every patient site, or why can't every patient home cannot become a site or a location where he can participate into clinical trial and where he can give the data collection and also where he can give the monitoring of adverse events, or he can reduce the amount of time for the travel. So one of the biggest advantage for remote clinical trial or decentralized clinical trial is he don't need to travel. His home only he can participate in clinical trial. He can conduct in clinical trial. He can collect the data and he can participate in your complete clinical trial data. So now this trials, what is the biggest advantage of this decentralized clinical trials is this trials aims to enhance the patient access. So patient can access from anywhere, any part, or any location in the world, and also the convenience of the patient is too much high, diversity and maintaining the highest amount of quality, and also the patient safety and regulatory compliance. All these are the biggest advantage of having decentralized clinical trials. So I'll repeat it. The patient access is more in decentralized clinical trials, and the convenience of the patient is more in decentralized clinical trials, and the regulatory compliance is more in decentralized clinical trials. The highest quality of clinical trial data can be there in decentralized clinical trials. Now, where from this word decentralized clinical trial started? Where from we got this decentralized clinical trial started? So the word started from a part wherein we call it as COVID-19. COVID-19 has given the decentralized clinical trials. So COVID-19 has given the whole disruption of clinical trials, and many of the clinical trials were paused, or many of the clinical trials were stopped. The patient engagements or enrollments or new trials were being on hold because there was no travel and everywhere there was a lockdown during your conduct of clinical trials, during conduct of COVID-19 clinical trials. So the biggest challenge happened in COVID-19, where the clinical trial was on hold and new treatments were not being tested or new clinical trials were not being initiated. So COVID-19 has postponed promising of new therapies or bringing of a new clinical trials into the market. So that's a most important and challenging aspects we have seen in your COVID-19. So various terminologies, including the decentralized clinical trial or direct to the patient or virtual studies or remote clinical trials came into picture. So all this terminology came. saying that why can't we conduct the clinical trials where patient can stay at home, which is also called as decentralized trials, direct to the patient, or remote trials, or the virtual clinical trials, wherein we can give such a concept. So COVID-19 has given more practical environment of decentralized clinical trial. We understand that decentralized clinical trial was not the new word which we have hearing here, but COVID-19 has given more on hold that patient has to participate in clinical trial, though the clinical trial is not being conducted at the hospital or at the site. So now the decentralized clinical trial, the remote clinical trials, the virtual clinical trials, direct to the patient clinical trial came into existence or more practical environment during your COVID-19. But now if you see this model, decentralized clinical trial was not new. Pfizer has conducted the first clinical trial, first randomized controlled trial, which was a pilot trial where small number of subjects were being included in an investigational product with no in-person site. So there was not even one clinical trial site, and this was conducted in year 2011 by Pfizer. So this was the first trial wherein there was no physical site or a hospital to come for the patient to participate in clinical trial, but the clinical trial was smoothly run. There was the clinical trial wherein they have participated in trial without traveling, without wasting the time, and without discouraging the patients into conducting in clinical trials. So now, what are the challenges of the traditional clinical trial, where the traditional clinical trial patient has to come to each visit, every visit, and give the assessments and give the data and provide the safety reporting and provide the data or kind of a safety monitoring or enrollment or recruitment, and for everything patient has to come, travel, wait for an investigator or nurse to give or collect the information. So it takes longer time than expected, and small number of participants might participate. It's a challenging to engage the patient, and having that said, that the patient recruitment might be reduced. Many are patients not ready to travel and participate in clinical trials. 80% of traditional clinical trials are not completed on time. So because the reason is the patient are not happy or patient is not ready to travel in a traditional clinical trials. Now, while you come back to your decentralized clinical trials, when you say that the decentralized clinical trial, how it is going to happen is these are executed by using telemedicine. So when you say telemedicine, so patient is using apps called as Zoom or WhatsApp call, video calls. By using telemedicine, they are participating in clinical trials, or mobile or local healthcare providers like surrounding lab is there where patient can run and give the data, or the local apps or mobile apps are being used for the patient participating in clinical trials or continuing in clinical trials. And there are different technologies where we are using, whereas it is called as siteless clinical trials, and where face to face is not needed or person to person physical is not needed while you participate or continue into clinical trials. Now these are including in-home visits like laboratory tests and functions, infusions can be done at the patient home, direct shipment of the drugs or the facilities or the study materials to patient home, and evaluation by videos like video calls rather than directly coming into the patient home, telephone calls, safety screenings, online assessments, all these things can be done by using decentralized clinical trial. So in centralized, the patient used to spend a lot of time. In decentralized, patient engagement is so much high, and patient is participating in clinical trial with lot of ease in participation into clinical trial. Now, what are the key technologies used in decentralized clinical trial? So the first one is remote monitoring tools, wherein there are wearable devices, wearable smart watches or mobile health apps that can track your details of vital signs or medication adherence, or the adverse event or symptom reporting also can be done by using of technology. So the first technology which is being used is remote monitoring tools like wearables or smartwatches or mobile health apps, or the one which can track the vital signs, or the one which can report the serious adverse event or adverse events or medication adherence. And telehealth platform, which includes both your telemedicine or telepharmacy, which facilitate the remote consultation of the patient and the investigator or the nurse or the physicians. And also the assessments can be done by using telehealth platforms, including the telemedicine or telepharmacy. Follow-up visit can be done by using the live telecast or live using the telemedicine app, and improving the access of the patient care and also the patient convenience. So patient can sit anywhere. You can directly interact with the patient any point in time. And one more important technology is electronic data capture, which is the enables the collection of data remotely by the investigators, and also electronic signatures as per 21 CFR Part 11 can be performed by the investigator. So remote monitoring tools like wearables and also the telehealth or telemedicines, or also the electronic data systems or electronic data captures can be done. And e-consents can be taken into picture, wherein earlier it was the paper based e-consent which was there. Now e-consent platforms wherein multiple multimedia contents are enhancing the participants understanding the consent status, or ensuring the compliance and regulatory compliance are being met or not. We are having e-consent. And remote patient engagement. So patient engagement can be done remotely by using chatbots or artificial intelligence or IVRS or IWRS calls. And these tools enhance the patient engagements and retention in clinical trials through the features called as patient portals and messaging platforms, and also educational resources. All these things are being used for remote patient engagement, the chatbots. So wherein the patient will be able to talk to a system rather than a human being. So blockchain technology, one more, it is used for security, integrity, and traceability of clinical trial data. The patient name, mail IDs, or phone numbers can be hidden, can be made confidentiality by privacy and confidentiality by using one thing which is called as blockchain technology. And we are using artificial intelligence and machine learning, which algorithms can be used for large volume of clinical trial data to identify the trends and also predict the outcomes. So these many technologies are being used for decentralized clinical trial, including remote monitoring, the telemedicines, and then telepharmacies, e-consent, artificial intelligence, blockchain technologies, and electronic data captures. All the systems are being used for conducting decentralized clinical trials, siteless clinical trial, virtual clinical trials, remote clinical trial. What are the advantage of clinical trials participating into this kind of systems? So now this allows us more of broader pool of patient data, where you can have lot of patients, multiple patients participating into clinical trials. You can use EHRs for patient screening and enrollment. Broader geographic area, you don't need to have only one location patient population. Diverse patient population can be done and reduce recruitment time, and patient engagement is increased, and fewer burden on the patients for traveling or for staying and all those things. Lower of trainings and lower of monitoring experience also, because you don't need to go and give the monitorings every time to the hospitals or at the locations. And video conferencing can allow more frequent and long term safety discussions and uh, assessments. And trials can finish on time, so these trials can be finished on time, avoiding lengthy and costly affairs or costly delays or costly activities. So these are the decentralized clinical trial advantage. And some of the disadvantages, not every subject can participate in decentralized clinical trials. Some participants might not be well versed in technology, so they will have a difficulty in technology, understanding this technology. And chatbots or health apps or video calling and medicines may struggle with the apps, if the app is simply does not offer a user friendly environment or experience, then it will be difficult for use of decentralized clinical trial. So now I have spoken about the following things. The first one is, what is decentralized clinical trial, why it got started, what is the history, when is the first decentralized no site clinical trial was being conducted, what is the difference between decentralized clinical trial and traditional clinical trial, what are the advantage of decentralized clinical trial and limitation of clinical trial, and what are the technologies and tools which are being used for decentralized clinical trial. So I'll give 1 minute of time so that people can ask questions on decentralized clinical trial. You can ask any kind of questions on decentralized clinical trials, then I'll be able to answer. So in a nutshell, what is decentralized clinical trials is the trials which are being conducted wherein there are no sites or very less sites which are available, where you can don't need to travel of the patient, and patient engagement is more, and more technology is being used to reduce the amount of time which is spent and the quality of clinical trial data which is being grown. So because of this, decentralized clinical trials are being used very much high, and future is all about decentralized clinical trial. So any questions anyone have, you can ask me now. That's the first thing which I wanted to ask. And the second thing, in the meantime, I will tell that where decentralized clinical trial interview questions are being asked. So please post your questions wherein I can try to answer those questions. And the second thing, please post your questions. Anyone have interview based questions to be answered, I'll be able to answer. The second part is this decentralized clinical trials are being asked in interviews, particularly for the positions which are being used for CRC, CRA, or monitoring, or project management, or data management. So all these positions requires one of the most important thing, which is called as decentralized clinical trial. So because decentralized clinical trials reduces the time which happens to be more for patient recruitment or patient compliance or patient assessments or patient conduct or patient engagement or patient handling and close out of clinical trial. So I'm getting, I think, some couple of questions, so I'll pick up one or two questions probably. So what are the potential cost saving and efficiencies associated with decentralized clinical trial when it is compared with traditional clinical trials? Now, the basically you have answered the question here is the what are the best things, what are the things which are being saved, either it is in money or either it is in kind of a technology or whatever it is being saved, what are the efficiencies it is being done. So now cost saving is been definitely high in decentralized clinical trial. So because it reduces the travel expenses for the patient, and also it reduces the amount of burden for the investigator also, and also the study staff, and it decreases the infrastructure which is required. So there is no infrastructure which is required. It decreases the infrastructure cost which is associated with the physical trial site. So there is no physical site, then the cost is reduced, the travel time is reduced, and also the logistic for data collection is reduced. You don't need to have databases which where there is 4 team members who are going to do this kind of a work. So now the biggest advantage, if you do this, travel time is reduced, infrastructure is reduced, resources are reduced, and also the streamlining of logistic is reduced. Additionally, the DCT can lead to shorter trial duration and quicker data collection and validation, resulting overall cost reduction. So now if anyone asks you in interview, so the first answer what we have to give is the potential cost saving is the first one, travel expenses for both parties and decreased in infrastructure cost. Second point, and also the third point, the streamlining logistic of data collection or validation and use of technology can reduce the amount of time for the market. Overall, the cost saving, particularly for your sponsor, can be done. So this is something which is more needed for cost saving in decentralized clinical trial. So I hope I have answered that question. I have one more question. What are the implications of decentralized clinical trials, particularly for site selection and site management? See, this is a most interesting question because first we need to understand that what is site selection and also what is site management. So the site selection is the one when you go and initiate a trial site wherein there is an investigator, CRC, and also IRB associated, and there are documentation space, there is a pharmacy area. So when you are going and selecting a site and managing a site, particularly in decentralized clinical trial, because we are saying that hardly you will have a visit at the sites. So geographically, the trial site becomes less critical. So because you don't need to have the patient traveling to the site, and this allows the broader recruitment of the patients, reducing the burden on trial sites. So hospitals will have less burden because patient is nevertheless is not traveling to the site. And also site management shifts towards the supporting patient remotely. So the patient will not be able to come to the site, but it can be supported with the remotely. So now it allows the compliance of the patient, whether the patient is taking a drug and is getting any adverse events, monitoring of the safety, vitals, and all those things can be done remotely. So now the burden on the site will reduce, but the sites will have to give more support to the patients remotely. Site has to give more of remote technologies, the apps and technologies. So in a nutshell, guys, if you want to conduct a clinical trial decentralized way, then it has to be more of technology front rather than any other aspects. So that's more in conducting of clinical trials for site selection and site management. I hope I have answered that question. So I'll take one more question if anyone have. So I have taken two questions. One is what are the potential cost savings, and one more is the decentralized site selection and management. So I'll take one more question. And today's topic is more particularly for the futuristic clinical trial, which is called as decentralized clinical trials. So wherein the remote monitoring and remote clinical trials can be performed by use of technology. So use of technology will reduce the amount of time, efforts, infrastructures, and everything. And remotely, you can participate in clinical trials. So I'm waiting for one more question. If anyone wants to ask one more question, then we will be able to answer that question. Yeah, I have got one more question. How does DCT differs from traditional clinical trials in terms of patient interaction and data collection? See, this is a very interesting question wherein we can have this as how it is different from interactions and also data collections. So now, when we say decentralized clinical trial, centralized clinical trial, you have a patients traveling to hospital. Decentralized, no patient or very less time of patients is traveling to the hospital. So now there is a difference, and patient interaction in DCT mainly occurs through the telemedicine or technology platforms or mobile applications. More convenience that patient does not need to travel, and also patient engagement or flexible engagement is being done. So that's the most important. So in decentralized, you will use the technology which is telehealth or mobile application, enabling more convenient and flexible engagement. But while you go for centralized, it will have more of physical connections or physical personal things which will be having interaction where it requires a time. Data collection is normally done by electronically in decentralized clinical trial, but in non-decentralized or site-centric clinical trials or site-specific clinical trial, it will be non-electronic or it will be on paper. So with the patient providing more of real-time data from the home in decentralized, but from the site in centralized. So it will enhance the convenience for the patient and also reducing the cost and burden on the trial side, enhancing the patient convenience and reducing the cost and also the burden to the trial sites or hospitals. So I think these are the advantage, and these are the interview based questions can be asked. So I covered what is decentralized clinical trials, history of decentralized clinical trials, and the first clinical trials which were being conducted as siteless or decentralized clinical trial, then advantage of decentralized clinical trial, technologies used in decentralized clinical trials, limitations of decentralized clinical trials, what are the potential cost saving for decentralized clinical trials, and what is the importance in site management and site selection for decentralized clinical trials, and what is the traditional clinical trials in terms of data collection and interactions. So I think with this I'm done with today's session, which is the topic on decentralized clinical trial, which is being asked in interviews, particularly for CRC or CRA or project managers. Please put this point in your resume that you have very familiar knowledge on decentralized clinical trial in resume, and speak all these points. What is decentralized? What is the difference? What are the advantage? What are the technologies? What are the limitations? What is the history of decentralized clinical trials? So thank you so much for joining today's YouTube live. I'll be taking one more YouTube live sessions next week. Please do join one more live session on LinkedIn tomorrow at 6 p.m. where I'll be speaking about regulatory affair associates. Till then, thank you so much. Have a nice, wonderful evening.